Hello, I'm David March, the Spy Guy, and wanted to. I'm doing a little something different today. Well, it's not different. The review of seems to be our fare here to give. As a friend of mine was saying yesterday, I'm giving the footnote every time I pause and add context to a situation. This is the podcast of the Lotus Eaters. They do not tend to go into this kind of stuff. They're much more focused on cultural issues in the United Kingdom, but and around the world. But today they released this video about the status of the British Armed Forces, and I wanted to comment on it because it's a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about here is what they are talking about, and like getting people ready to understand what's going on in the world. So let's just start the show here and let them start talking.
Again, with a bad news theme here, a British paratrooper was killed in Ukraine, unfortunately. And the government is saying that Lance Corporal George Hooley was far away from the front line and that he was accidentally killed while training Ukrainians on some kind of new defensive capability.
Yeah, I don't believe that, and neither do these guys. He was probably much more near the front than he should have been, and probably did not die in an accident. He was probably in combat, maybe hit by a drone.
The first point that I want to make is that I don't think that I believe them, because my understanding is that he was in a Special Forces support group, meaning that he would have been close to the front line, supporting another Special Forces element, and probably ended up getting tragically killed that way. But the government is very keen to say that, no, he was just sort of training and providing support and these kinds of things. I don't honestly trust them that it was an accident.
No, it's not an accident. Especially the British Paras are the equivalent of the United States Army Rangers. So that's not unrealistic.
I don't fully believe that. And this is important because on this question hinges how involved is Britain in the Ukrainian war. The mood from the public and from high officials has been a bit jingoistic, shall we say. And the head of the army said last year that Britain must be ready to fight a war in 3 years, and that it should be doubling the army's fighting power by 2027 and tripling it by 2030.
Good luck with that.
I mean, it's a weird thing to say in a way, because the military should be ready to fight full stop, not in 3 years' time. That's an admission of weakness in a sense. And of course, I also think that our standing military is woefully small. And if we didn't have this needless government spending in lots of other areas of the economy, I think it would have been much better spent on our military and giving us hard power around the world, which actually is a good return on investment in many cases.
Exactly. Well, there have been a number of news reports that have basically outright said that we have very weak defensive capabilities or offensive capabilities right now, put into the public space, and then we do things like we shut down our steel as well.
Yeah, look, the British had these Storm Shadow missiles they were giving Ukraine. You know what the monthly production of a Storm Shadow is? One a month. You're going to defeat the Russians with one cruise missile you can make a month? Give me a break.
Well, all of which is basically blaring out this huge siren to any enemy countries that may be looking, going like, we're weak.
Yes.
And it's a very strange thing to be broadcasting that to the world.
We've not learnt our lessons from World War I and II, that if you import a large degree of things, then you're easy to blockade.
Exactly.
That's not been fixed in the slightest.
Yeah, we took advantage.
If anything, it's got worse.
First World War by blockading Germany's food.
Mm-hmm.
And when you hear about these stories, you have to sort of remember that the way that the army is planning, at least according to the head of the army last year, they think they might be fighting China or Russia or Iran, which he calls an axis of upheaval, which is a new one. I have to admit.
Better than better than the was it
Axis
Reagan
of
or
evil.
Bush?
It was Axis of Evil was Bush.
It was
Jr.
Bush.
Bush Jr.
Yep, and then they're going to comment like we have. Everyone's always calling things after the Axis because that's our common religion and framework is World War II.
Axis of evil, yes. He was also the first man I ever heard say that Islam was a religion of peace. And having grown up in the Middle East, you'd think I'd have heard this a lot of time if it was true. But anyway.
They're really just obsessed with keeping the word Axis in there because they want
like it.
They want the World War II Hitler comparison to be in your head.
Yeah, they just want to kind of emphasize that they're the bad guys. And
yes, exactly.
You're not meant to be on their side.
But they've been...
Yeah, remember the Axis is Germany and Italy's alliance in 1936. And it's because they're in an axis. Germany's on top of Italy. God. Iran, Iraq, and North Korea were not in alliance with each other at that time. Iran offered to help America fight Afghan. Make an alliance, for crying out loud. Dumbasses.
Going on, about how Britain needs to be ready to fight a war potentially with Russia, even as Trump is saying that there should be a peace plan for Ukraine, and even as the national security strategy of the United States, which I covered in this week's Realpolitik, was all about the necessity of ending the war with Russia. So they're sort of emphasizing that we need to end the war with Russia. The Americans are saying it, and the reaction from Britain is, no, we have to be ready for war with Russia. But the reality is that this condition of Britain's armed forces is atrocious. During the time in 2023 and 2024, where the Houthi were blockading the Red Sea, Britain struggled to send either of the two aircraft carriers into the area, and instead had to rely on Typhoon flights going 3,000 miles to attack the Houthi. And in the end, one of the aircraft carriers was deployed, but it took a pretty long time, and it was pretty obvious that Britain's carriers, the main means of power projection that the country has, can't really function, to the extent that sending either of them to a training exercise couldn't be done.
Yep. Keep up with first-rate militaries, third-rate militaries. So with drones, I've heard it been mentioned that every power is now equal to, there's no difference between anyone else. You have, every power is basically, if they have enough drone capability, a first-tier power, including the Houthis, who defeated the U.S. Navy last year when they tried to run the gauntlet.
A training exercise. They did eventually manage to send one of them, but it was obviously a humiliation. And they can't get the propellers working, which is, not the most complicated part, as far as I can tell. I'm not a technologist. I'm not an expert on these things, but it seems to be one of the less difficult parts of building a vessel.
I mean, you would hope the British would be good with ships.
You'd think so. But the reality is that these things that cost 3.7 billion each couldn't function. They had to pull out of exercises.
The problem isn't even our technological understanding or how we've constructed them. The problem is we mothball everything
pretty
when
much.
It's not in use, and just don't fund our military enough for it to be functional. We try and cut costs on the military, but it's one of those things where if you cut costs in it, you will pay the price no matter what, because it's something that you should constantly be seeking to expand your power and influence and capability with. The US does understand this, which is why they've got hard and soft power, as well as obviously being one of the largest and most successful countries. So they've got the ability to back up what they say because they've got the rifles and the ships and the missiles.
Exactly. And in case you think that it's just the aircraft carriers, it's...
I have been to Portsmouth a couple years ago, and I did get a picture of the aircraft carrier.
It's considerably worse because the way that some of the new destroyers were designed, they didn't have any land attack capability. So these things were sent to help with intercepting the drones and the missiles that the Houthis were firing, but they couldn't retaliate against the source of fire. which seems like a pretty basic thing that you want to keep in mind, because the assumption was that the aircraft carriers would do the ground attack bit and that the destroyers would just be there to defend the aircraft carriers.
Is this not another consequence of us having our budget cut, whereby, you know, if you can't afford to have a functional military, at least have defensive capabilities?
Well, you'd assume that, but then the carriers cost £3.5 billion, and even then, when they deploy, they can't deploy with a full air wing. So they're supposed to be able to carry 40 aircraft, and then, you know, maybe 24, and then it turns out, no, just 16, which is maybe enough against the Houthi, but if you're fighting against Iran, it's not, let alone if you're fighting against China. So the capability has been so degraded that it's just becoming a major embarrassment. So the ships can't attack land targets, the destroyers can't attack land targets, and the aircraft carrier that is meant to attack land targets can't be deployed. So it's a shit show. And then you look at the state of the submarine fleet, and here you have Rear Admiral Philip Matthias, who used to run the nuclear bit in the Ministry of Defense, the director of nuclear policy at the MOD,
Britain's nuclear
and who
triad.
led the review into Trident, whether or not Trident was working and could deliver. So he knows what he's talking about. And he says Britain is no longer capable of running a nuclear submarine program after catastrophic failures pushed it to the brink.
Yeah, it's so bad that Britain had to put up on LinkedIn an ad for getting this new commander of their subfleet on LinkedIn. They couldn't get, because no one within the Royal Navy was capable of doing the job.
So this is somebody deeply in the know, and he's saying that the situation is absolutely atrocious. And he's saying that Britain should pull out of AUKUS. AUKUS is a Australia, UK, US alliance to build submarines in partnership between the three countries to deter China. And he's saying this can't be done anymore. And he's saying that the length of deployment on submarines has become too long, that it is no longer sustainable because there aren't enough of them, and there aren't enough crews, and there isn't enough training. So this is what things look like in terms of the power projection and in terms of the nuclear deterrence. And it's pretty atrocious. Then you look at the land bit, and I want to talk a little bit about the Army's new infantry fighting vehicle. Now, infantry fighting vehicles, they do what the name says. It's where you place infantry and you send them in order to fight. It's part of having
31 soldiers fall ill in Ajax. APC. Okay, here we go from the BBC. Stop sharing. Share. Screen. Okay. Let's see what we got. The Army has paused use of its Ajax armored vehicles after soldiers become unwell from noise and vibration during a military exercise. 30 soldiers became ill when training to use the APC over the weekend, and an investigation has been launched out of an abundance of caution. Yeah, like you don't want your soldiers getting sick. Some emerged vomiting from the vehicles, while others were shaking after the military exercise on the Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire. It comes just weeks after the UK government said it was confident NATO allies would be interested in buying the armored vehicles that had made in South Wales. Yeah, they're going to buy vehicles that make them sick. The defense minister has left its troubles behind as Ajax declared its initial operating capability, which means it can deploy squadron on operations. million-pound vehicles were originally due to enter service in 2019. It's been 6 years over the time limit. A small number of personnel, 30. Small amount of testing will continue in order to ensure that any issues can be identified and resolved. This thing's 6 years behind schedule, and it's making the soldiers sick. Review the $6 billion pound program in 2023 highlighted systemic cultural institutional problems at the MOD and a number of errors of judgment. Over 160 have been built out of an intended 589. It's a 2-week pause. It's been estimated that the full operating capacity for the program may not be achieved for another 4 years. Yeah, they're going to be fighting the Russians. And the guy said, yeah, we're going to be fully functional, triple the size of our military by 2030. But they can't even do that. Most advanced medium-weight armored fighting vehicle on the planet. That makes it Soldier 6. Ajax is replacement of an aging fleet of CVRT vehicles, which first entered service in 1971. Great. The British armored vehicle was ordered in 2014. The excessive noise were said to have been resolved years ago. The Ministry of Defense often rejects allegations of being involved in a long list of procurement errors, but that's getting harder to deny with Ajax. A failed attempt to hide some of the problems haven't helped either. Great, and you think that this is only happening in Britain. I have stuff to sell you. Okay, go back to the video.
Mechanized infantry. And the army has no idea what it's going to do with these things, because the tracked version of these vehicles, Ares and Athena, don't have a clear doctrine as to how they're going to be used. The Challenger 2 is out of date. 14 out of 200 were sent to Ukraine, and they performed quite badly, all things considered.
Yeah,
because they're not ready.
And people in Syria, they were deployed to Syria, and they were trash tanks there as well, which is sad since Challenger 2 was once considered the best tank in the world
for this kind of new warfare. And the existing infantry fighting vehicle Warrior is going to be out of service soon. There's a bunch of other versions of them, like different things, but the newest one, which is meant to cost £10 billion to build 500 of them, isn't really working. And this is 8 years late. And the ones that are being delivered have pretty terrible quality issues. This is a pretty good account, Military Banter, and he's been covering this in detail. And what's been happening is that soldiers who are receiving these new infantry fighting vehicles from General Dynamics are so pissed off at the state of the items that are being delivered to them that they've started leaking information about the poor quality. And I just want to show you this briefly. I'm not a technical guy, so I don't fully understand this. But I know you shouldn't have this kind of loose wiring. I know these things shouldn't be shaking when they're bolted on an armored infantry fighting vehicle. Look at the number of bolts there, and it still sort of snaps off just like it's nothing. This is going into the exhaust bit. Everything in the vehicle shakes to the extent that 31 soldiers were injured just because of being in the vehicle as it was being tested out.
Do you know what that reminded me of? those videos that you see of builders and construction experts going to new build houses across the UK and seeing the absolute cowboy job that has been done on them, just going around the bathroom, oh, none of these tiles are sealed properly, the sealant across the edges isn't done right, the hinges on the doors aren't fitted properly, so it'll warp.
It's the same philosophy governing both, isn't it?
Yeah.
They know some idiot's going to buy it, and in this case, the idiot is the British government.
Yeah, maybe.
So as long as it looks like a tank or an infantry fighting vehicle, then they're going to buy it, and then it's only going to be later that we're going to realize, oh, these are rubbish.
Oh, we shouldn't be relying on cowboys for military defense. I mean, come on.
That analogy kind of reminds me of the videos in China where they're like smashing apart the buildings and the concrete's falling off. And I was hoping we haven't outsourced our military industry to China as well, although by the video that might be a good thing, you know?
Yep. So here's what people are sort of reporting. I think his name is Alfia Usher, and I've reached out to him. They're coming off the production line with around 150 faults each. They can't meet the tests that General Dynamics itself set up. Then they have to get in the civil servants in the Department of Defense to get them to sign a concession so that vehicles with these numbers of faults are allowed into the army anyway. The ex-army guys are sort of being abused and being made to sort of defend whatever General Dynamics wants, and the management can't meet the targets that it set itself in any shape, way, or form. And the soldiers that are there to do the testing are made to work 16-hour shifts or made to work weekends because they can't say no to orders. It's not like civilian employees.
Right.
And it seems like a pretty fat trough, and everybody's feeding off of it, including people who are in the military who then get paid by this military contractor.
So it's basically
in order to sign it off.
The boots on the ground and the taxpayer that are losing out, and everyone else wins.
Pretty much. And these reports keep on coming in. They're removing data for inspections, which seems a bit crazy. They're trying to blame the users for getting injured in the vehicle, saying that they are not wearing the seat belts properly or are not sitting properly. I'm sorry, when you think about this vehicle sort of going through European plains, bumping up and down in farmland, do you think everybody's going to be sitting properly while they're waiting for drones to kill them?
Yeah.
And some of it gets pretty bad because they don't seem to have figured out the camouflage for the vehicles. So they can't put camouflage nets on them so that they can't be seen by the eye.
Yeah, also, like, you're supposed to be fighting out of these vehicles. You're wearing seatbelts? You need to get out of the vehicle quickly in case you run into the enemy. So the APC is supposed to drive you there so you can fight. And you might have to fight inside the APC.
And they haven't figured out how to place thermal covers on them so that they can't be seen by infrared drones.
These are basic engineering things that should have been figured out before they even, while it was in concept, let alone after they built it.
So they're using things from other kinds of vehicles that the military has and trying to cut them to size and stick them together to make this thing work. And then you ask yourself, well, is this how war is going to be fought in the drone age?
Yeah.
And the answer is clearly no. And so the whole thing, with reports coming in from inspectors and so on, they're saying that 150 faults might be an understatement. And people who are involved are saying, I hope it gets cancelled because it's bloody useless.
Yeah.
But this is going to cost 10 billion pounds. The worst part is that these same people who are responsible for this project were awarded Mega Project of the Year. So incompetence at this level is getting rewarded, and the taxpayer is getting screwed, and the army isn't getting what it needs, to the extent that soldiers are being injured because of the vehicle before getting into battle.
There is something that
I'm glad to know that the Oscars aren't the only useless, corrupt, inconsequential award show out there. That apparently even the military defense contractor award shows are just as shit.
Yes.
I was
Fair enough. I never really thought about that too much before, but yeah. Boondoggle of the Year award.
I'm just going to say that one thing that I have learned, learning about the military and the political side of it, is that when you listen to the soldiers, they rarely complain about kit that's good.
Yeah.
And they only really complain if it's bad. Like I remember many soldiers complaining about, was it the L80?
Right. The assault rifle.
Yeah. It being very heavy and a bit unreliable. And then they replaced it eventually after a long time. But they weren't complaining unduly because they'd used American issue assault rifles and they were better.
Well, the problem is the mindset, because the British tried to build a Rolls-Royce to send into combat when you just need a Toyota.
Yeah.
And so they tried to add everything on it without understanding that the nature of warfare has fundamentally changed. And it's all about attritable assets that are cheap and easily replaceable.
Pretty much what we're watching in Russia right now, in Ukraine. We need Jeeps, and we make Formula One sports cars. F-35, number one example.
So the Ajax is supposed to do everything, but the result is that it can't do anything.
Right.
Whereas a Toyota is just supposed to get you over difficult terrain, and that's exactly what it does. And if you're at the age of drones, you're not going to be able to armor the vehicle enough. You need lightness, and you need proper defenses for the soldiers, and you need invisibility. But this is supposed to be a recon vehicle, and it can't even get proper camouflage. How do you do recon without decent camouflage? I don't fully understand how did that happen? How did that happen? And so you see the establishment is finally beginning to wrestle with this. And this came out from Frank Gardner, who's ex-army guy, works for the BBC, obviously a regime guy, but okay, fine.
I think the regime, when it's talking about war capabilities, has to be honest with itself. So at the very least...
Well, clearly they haven't been when it comes to everything.
Well,
yeah. Well, regime guy, but he's like, even the regime can criticize itself. But, think about who has been running the Ministry of Defense and how much the EI has gone in there, and they've probably purged out all the competent people and replaced them with...
but when it comes to submarines and when it comes to nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers and all of that stuff...
Well, hopefully this guy can be a bit more honest about it.
He's beginning, but he's only covering a small part of the problem. So he's going on about how, yes, there's this change in warfare and it requires just volume. And in it, he attacks Russian equipment as being substandard and Russian soldiers as being terrible and poorly fed.
Yeah.
In a front line that's several thousand miles long, everybody's poorly fed.
Yeah, or more, the fact is that just so many of these people don't get accurate information because their agents in the Five Eyes community are telling their principals what they want to hear, not the truth. This happens all the time because you don't want to do your promotions and your pay and all of that is based on telling people what they want to hear, not the truth. The truth tellers usually get purged.
So fine, okay.
Rocking the boat.
Okay. Badly trained. Well, they're winning. Okay, but let's get past that and the criticism of the Russian army.
Also, there's an incredible amount of racism, like anti-Slavic, anti-Russian racism is the best way I can describe when I talk to some of these guys. It's like, I'm sorry, you're clearly racist.
But what they're saying here was what he's quoting in this article is that the Russians are producing every month 150 tanks, 550 infantry fighting vehicles, 120 high-end drones, the Lancet drones, and 50 artillery pieces.
And you tell people that, and they look at you as if you have a second head growing out of your skull, out of your neck. And you're like, this is your own stats.
The entire span of the Ajax project produces 589 infantry fighting vehicles over several years.
If the lessons of the past 2 world wars are anything to go by, the main thing you need to learn is industrial capacity wins you wars, right? That's why America did so well, is that it was an industrial powerhouse and produced just massive scale military equipment.
And
like the Sherman tank, the Liberty ships were designed to carry 16 Sherman tanks. Purposely, you could just drive them off. And one of the reasons why larger tanks that were much more capable didn't get really deployed till the end of the war is because the Sherman tanks were just the entire logistics train was designed to move Sherman tanks fast.
The Germans were constantly of the view that American tanks were inferior to the Panzers and to the Tigers and to all of the upgrades in between. But there was just so many of them that they won anyway.
Well, it was the same with
the T-34,
with the Eastern Front and
yes.
the Soviet tanks.
Yes,
the Germans destroyed countless of them, and they captured a few, and they looked over and said, "Well, this may all be like cutting edge technology, but it's really badly put together. This wouldn't last very long."
Yes,
but as many as they destroyed, they just sent more and more and more because productive capabilities were such that they could do.
Well, quantity has a quality on its own, doesn't it?
Yes, as nice Mr. Stalin said.
I mean, it doesn't really paint a good picture for us if we're struggling to produce even like...
I'm going to get a bit closer to the mic.
Sorry. If we're struggling to produce like basic infantry fighting vehicles, and, you know, as you mentioned, the massive numbers that Russia's producing,
yep,
and ours are coming out with hundreds of flaws, our men getting injured, not even by the enemy, but ourselves.
Yes.
It's a bit of a...
It's a terrible condition to be in.
Like we're trying to build bespoke, except we can't even do that very well now.
Yep. Can't even screw things in properly. It's all loose.
And here's what RUSI is saying. RUSI is the Royal United Services Institute, which is almost the think tank of the government. It's where a lot of policy is formulated, and it's where the government gets its official views. So they've had some pretty terrible views in the past, but at least here they're realistic. And they say there remains little evidence that the UK has a plan to fight a war lasting more than a few weeks.
Right.
Medical capacity is limited. Reserve regeneration pipelines are slow. The British plan for mass casualty outcomes appears to be based on not taking casualties. And then the gentleman says, this could be considered an optimistic planning assumption.
Optimistic.
That's putting it lightly.
Yes, exactly.
So what's the...
hold on. There's something I want to get to here. And then the same gentleman says that to fight a long war, you need proper backup. It demands a second and even third echelon, personnel, platforms, and logistics chains that can absorb losses and continue the fight. But this depth is absent from current British force design. So he mentions that you need logistics chains, implicitly industrial chains as well, to support them, like on which they would be built, but they're absent. And every industry in this country is collapsing because of high energy prices and taxation to death.
Yeah.
So the belligerence against Russia at a time when soldiers are actually dying fighting for Ukraine seems a little bit disconnected from the reality.
So what I was going to ask, is there just some kind of assumption going on that there would be a grand scale American bailout in the case of any larger scale war breaking out? Because that's the only explanation that I can think for such haphazard planning.
Yes, that's the assumption. But the American new national security strategy is all about reducing commitments in Europe. Now, Congress just passed the Defense Authorization Act, which requires the Americans to keep not less than almost 80,000 soldiers in Europe for more than 45 days. So they can't go below 80,000 for more than 45 days is the new thing. But I don't know whether or not the president is going to actually implement the letter of it.
Yep.
And the strategy is that, no, we need to get out. And we need to let the Europeans defend themselves.
And that's what Trump has been saying for years.
And that's what he's been saying for years now. And that's increasingly the mood in America. So it's not just Trump. It's the public mood that says, okay, you guys are not doing your bit.
And in the long term, this is best for both America and Europe as well.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
But we're just not ready.
No.
But the issue is that when the government is faced with this reality, they go on the defensive and say, well, we're spending £5 billion to upgrade this and that, where you're spending maybe 10 billion on Ajax or 5 billion on Ajax, and you're getting 600 vehicles over 5 or 6 years, 8 years late after 15 years of design, when the Russians are producing 500 vehicles in a month.
Yeah, and all these, you see there 30,000 monthly battlefield casualties with fresh blood. Bull crap. We have Media Zona's numbers. It's 145,000 dead confirmed, with another 50%, which I don't disagree with, because you're never going to track everything down perfectly. But 145,000, 220,000 dead is not from 30,000 monthly battlefield casualties. They're just lying to you.
So there's a complete dissociation between what they're saying, what they're doing, and reality. There's no connection between the three. And they seem to think that this is good enough. At least a big part of the problem, and I have to mention this, is the way that the culture in the armed services has changed. So the RAF was complaining that pilots or people trying to become pilots are useless white men. And wokeness and environmentalism and managerialism and all of this BS has completely infected the armed forces.
Correct.
Which is why you see them behaving the way they do about Ajax. They're trying to find a bureaucratic solution. Now this guy is saying that they're trying to find who is leaking information to him so that they can punish him. But they are completely out of contact with the fact that if these vehicles are used in their current state, you might as well give them to Russia, because they'll do more damage to Russia that way than if you try to use them against the Russian military. And the complete culture of it has just been destroyed.
Just look at this headline here. Or like leaked emails show the pressure apparently being applied to filter out white male recruits and fast-track women and ethnic minorities in a country that's still pretty much white. Like, they do not have the same problems as, say, America does with all these different groups. Like, it's still a predominantly white country. It can also be revealed 31 white men are to receive £5,000 each to compensate them for being unfairly disadvantaged by the approach.
And you get these bureaucrats trying to run an army when armies aren't run that way. Yep. And it's all about diversity and gender rules and integrating women in the armed services and trans this and DEI that. Well, and that's what you get.
That might be a new strategy, given that increasingly young men of this country are not going to want to fight for what this country is. So they're thinking maybe we can get the new people in to fight for the country. So, but they don't want to either.
No.
Do you know what country. I've always interpreted this as? This sort of thing is not necessarily just purely trying to expand this ideology to all aspects of society. It's also that the military is sort of a stronghold, and still is to this day, of young white men who are patriotic about their country, will fight and die for it. And basically, when you're looking at that as a left-winger or a sort of neoliberal bureaucrat, that's antithetical to your ideology, and them having hard power is scary to them.
So the Saudis never wanted a strong military because they were concerned that it would lead a coup against them.
Correct.
The royal family was afraid that they'd lead a coup against them. So instead, they ended up sponsoring militias reporting the different princes. And it's the same mindset here.
Also, they had a tendency, whenever they do get into heavy trouble, like Saddam's threatening to invade the country, they just would always bring in a couple divisions of Pakistanis. And Pakistani has also guaranteed them nuclear support, weapon support. So there's a very strong alliance there between the two different groups of people. But yeah, so whenever they need it, that they bring in foreign mercenaries to do their fighting for them.
That sees the military as a threat, because you know that the grunts who are joining the armed services are definitely not going to be happy with more Afghans, with more rapes, with more lunacy, with more transgenderism, with all of that, with all of the regime religion, essentially.
Some of the most right-wing people I've ever spoken to, the most patriotic,
exactly,
dyed-in-the-wool people have been in the armed forces.
Exactly. Exactly. That's what they're there for. They're there for the violently patriotic.
Yeah.
That's what they're there for.
And it's desirable. It makes them better at fighting.
And it makes them better people. I'm not at their level, you know.
And it's the same when I've been for the show that Samson and I do doing about Japan. I've been reading up about Japanese history leading up to the Second World War, and it's just kind of funny how in the 1920s and 30s, what happens is you get the ultra nationalistic army. Just anytime the emperor wants to set up a new government, the government don't do what the army wants. They're not in the army's pocket. The army's really unhappy with how their own family members are being mistreated at home because they were living under really bad conditions for the sake of rice farming, etc. And it would just be the emperor sets up the government, army coups the government, kills the prime minister. Emperor sets up a new government, says, don't you go killing my prime minister again. Army goes, okay. The next day, they coup the government and kill the prime minister. And it just happens over and over and over again.
And whose fault is that? Britain. But that's a whole other thing. I once said I was on a group chat or email thread, and they were talking about how Japan could win World War II. And I said, I know how the Japanese could easily win World War II. Because their war on Germany in 1941, they get everything they want. They get everything they want. British come in, they can negotiate like some sort of treaty between the Chinese and the Japanese, so they're not constantly in fighting mode, and they get all the oil and all the support forces they need, send an expeditionary force off to help the British. In a lot of ways, I think the British made a big mistake at the end of World War I, aligning with the United States because of my prime minister at the time, convincing them that America was a better bet than aligning with the Japanese. And if the British had stayed in alliance with the Japanese, I don't think we would have seen them go down this path as much as they did.
Until you do get to the situation in the late 1930s when it's basically the emperor's a figurehead to a military state.
Yep.
So that's always a worry with these kind of...
And the leadership of the prime minister goes from the army wing to the navy wing. Who's in charge at that time?
Corrupt regimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, that's my segment.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.
Well, I better give it a like. Okay, well, that's kind of the show for today. I hope people liked it. I'm being told that this is probably the best format for the show, so we'll probably be not talking about the Russian and the Tsarist Russia. That was a friend of mine said, I was about 20 minutes of that, and I started to fall asleep. So I don't think we'll be going down that, but we'll start doing these kind of, as he said, footnotes where I comment and give some insight into what other people may have missed in the course of things. So, yeah, like I said, this was I should say it, join the locals if you want to. I haven't published anything there in a while, but I mean, it is there. I've had one person once gave me some money through that program. And if you like this, you should need to like, share, and subscribe and help me grow the channel. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.